The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. Big Softy. I had a rough time as a kid. I suffered from both hemangiomas and spotty hair loss, two conditions that would go away the closer I got to my teenage years. But for those first few years, I was a social pariah. I looked strange, which was enough to draw unwanted attention. Some kids thought I had a kind of mange, while others just didn't like to look at me. My parents didn't make it easier for me, forcing me to bring various creams that I had to apply during school hours. I ended up trying to make my own fun. I made up my own friends in my head, and I played a lot of board games on my own. My parents were going through a divorce, and both swore off having any more children, so I ended up an only child. Most of my made-up friends were just a plaything. I could tell it was all just for fun, and that they weren't real. I didn't see them or hear them. I made up little stories in my head, trying to imagine what they would do if they were there. I could get really into it. I had this one imaginary friend who always tried to cheat in games, so when I played with him at the table, I'd move the pieces in a way he would, and thus cheat. Another friend was obsessed with lemonade, so I always brought an extra glass for him. When I was 7 years old, there was a new friend. This one was different. I could really see him. I knew he was just as fake as the rest of them, as he only appeared when I was alone and playing. But he was strange. I hadn't imagined him for a specific purpose. I didn't come up with a name for him. I didn't know anything about him. Even if I would pretend not to know the cheater and the lemonade enthusiast to drive conversation, this one was a genuine mystery. He was scary. He looked like a person, but sort of stretched, at least 7 feet tall. Pale, flaking, grey skin. He was super thin and had this sort of hanging face, like his skin was slouching. It reminded me of a wet towel hanging off a rack. And his eyes, well, they were empty. There was nothing there. He was super quiet and rarely moved. I'd usually forget he was even there, unless he made his little sound, a sort of teeth chatter. It was like a tick. Sometimes a single click. Other times he'd just stand there, chattering excitedly. Clack, clack, clack. At first, I just asked him to go away. He didn't talk, and he didn't answer any questions. No matter what I played, he refused to participate, or even acknowledge me. He just wanted to be there. Most of the time, he was a nuisance. He'd scare me. I'd wake up to that noise of chattering teeth at night, or it'd click right next to my ear when I played with my board games. Over time, it went from scary to frustrating. He was just being a bother. But there was that time in middle school that changed the way I viewed him. There was a new kid in school who was an infamous bully. Let's call him Ian. He'd been moved from another school where he'd been a menace. No one really knew what to do with him, so they just sort of moved him around. And now it was our turn to deal with him. And of course, I was a clear target. Ian started calling me Scabs, and it kind of caught on. The sick dog of the class now had a name that the others clung to, and it wasn't a good one. But it didn't end there. One day after school, he took things too far, spurred on by cheers and laughter from my classmates. I was beaten bloody. While I was beaten, the others went inside to get some scissors. They were going to cut my mangy hair. When it was just me and the Ian, I heard that teeth chattering noise again. I could see the strange figure in the background. My first thought was that he was there to mock me too. But, to my surprise, it had other plans. It leaned in, unhinged its massive jaw, and took a bite out of Ian's ear, tearing it in half. It was instant pandemonium. Ian turned around, not looking at me, but straight at his assailant. He could see him too. Blood and screams. Panic. Ian scrambled like a scared dog, tripping over his own legs to get away. The others came running back out, but as they saw what had happened, they all had a collective gasp. Seeing them step back was empowering. They turned and ran, screaming and pointing. They hadn't seen what Ian and I had. They thought I'd done it. "He took his ear," they shrieked. "He took it. He took Ian's ear." The kids ran. They ran like their heads were on fire. I sat there for a moment, my body pulsing with bruises and shock. The strange creature approached me. Its teeth had stopped chattering, replaced with chewing slowly, savoring a meal. For all the help it had given me, this was grotesque. My adrenaline had spiked, and I just said the first thing that came to mind. Maybe it didn't really want to hurt me. Maybe it was there for some other reason. Either way, I said what I said. "You're just a big softy, aren't you?" I sniffled. You're a big softy." "By GSOFTY, it wheezed back. It was less of a voice and more of a throbbing wind. His lips didn't move. "BIGSOFTY, it continued. "I am." "Yeah, you are." I nodded. "That's you." It leaned in close, inspecting me. It didn't breathe. "NAME, it hissed. "FREE. I stared into those hollow sockets, waiting for something to happen. A smile, a breath, anything, but no. I blinked, and Big Softy was no longer there. Sometimes violence solves things. While that brawl didn't make me popular, it stopped kids from teasing me. Classmates began using my regular name again. Sure, there were still whispers and the occasional side-eye, but that was still an immense improvement. No one spoke about that fight, though. I didn't want to get in trouble for the ear, and they didn't want to get in trouble for bullying me, so we kept it to ourselves and never spoke of it again. Ian seemed fine with sitting quietly and not talking to anyone about it. He'd changed. And Big Softy, well, he sort of disappeared. It's like he'd done his job and went on his merry way. For a couple of years that followed, I thought he just might have been a figment of my imagination. Maybe I was the one who really bit Ian, and this whole thing was just a way to cope with that trauma. It had to be something of the sort. Imaginary friends don't affect the real world. Then again, giving him a name, even a nickname, seemed to have encouraged him. Or something worse. Most of my afflictions cleared up in high school, and I found a solid group of like-minded youths. Over time, all little dream friends faded from memory. The one who cheated, the one who loved lemonade, 100 others who I can't even remember. The way they looked, the way they sounded, their names and quirks, they all went away. But Big Softy stayed on my mind, realer than any of them. The hollow eyes, the chattering teeth. It was strange how the most horrifying of all my imaginary friends turned out to be the one who stuck around the longest. But time passes. High school turned to college. College turned to work. And by the time I was 27, I had a pretty cozy life going. But even then, despite not having seen or heard that childhood friend of mine, Big Softy still drifted into my dreams every now and then. I wish I could end the story here. It'd just be a strange anecdote about something that happened to me as a kid. Sadly, that's not the case. What began as an unusual childhood curiosity turned into a waking nightmare. Back in 2019, I was in a pretty good place. I was 6 months into a promotion that added a flat 15% to my salary. And I was finally getting back into dating after a messy breakup a couple of months earlier. Nothing serious, but it felt good to shake off the cobwebs. I was coming home from a long day of overtime and had to stop for gas. Nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. I got myself a Slim Jim and told the long-haired man behind the counter that I wanted $30 on pump 2. I handed over my card and checked my phone for a moment. Clack. Teeth. Turning around, nothing. I could feel my pulse spiking for no apparent reason. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, the overhead lights, The faint whiff of gasoline. That one noise brought me straight back to middle school. It sent this cold spike straight into my head, as if I could picture that hollowed-out face in front of me. I snapped out of it with a beep from the cash register. I thanked the cashier and headed for the door. Just before I left, I turned back to them. "Excuse me, but did you hear something strange just now?" "No, oh, can't say I did. Sorry." "Did you click your tongue or something?" "Can't say I did, sir." I nodded. Of course they didn't. The same sensation came back to me on 4 different occasions. Once when I was closing the blinds in my bedroom, once when getting the mail at work, another time when stuck in traffic, and once when I was about to answer a phone call. I ended up missing it. It was such a strange reminder. It had come out of nowhere, and now it was starting to become a daily annoyance. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. There wasn't really a direction. It was just like, in my head, it was there, everywhere, nowhere, and inside. Clack. And yet, Big Softy was yet to be seen. I was having trouble focusing on work. I couldn't push my intrusive thoughts out, and I ended up doing some digging on social media, looking up old acquaintances from school, folks I hadn't seen or heard from in years. Some had started families. Others had moved far away for work or studies. There were only a handful of them still left in Minnesota. One face stood out to me, though. Ian. Turns out, he was still around. The moment I got home from work, I went straight to my computer. I looked up Ian on some of the more common social media sites. The man had no privacy settings. Most of it was just nonsense. Pictures of him having beers with the boys. A couple of nice cars. Group pictures of random people with generic nicknames. This was a man that wanted to express nothing more than being Han Friday blessed. But looking a little closer, there were a few cracks in the facade. For example, there were a couple more recent comments he'd made to a few friends of his. "God doesn't just send angels to protect you," he said in one post. "Sometimes he sends demons to test you." Looking a bit closer revealed a lot more pain than was readily apparent. Ian was taking medication for schizophrenia. He was overcoming a drinking problem. He seemed to constantly be bouncing between complete disregard for others and hysterical regret for his actions. He could be fighting for forgiveness in one post and bragging about stealing from work in the next. The man was a mess, a complete mess, and that half-missing ear of his didn't do him any favors, no matter how many tattoos he put on his neck to divert the attention. But one particular post caught my attention. He was discussing lifestyle challenges with a local youth pastor, an old acquaintance we had in common, and they were at a disagreement. Ian spat out, "I don't deny my goddamn problems. I know what they look like. I know their names. I see their teeth. See their teeth. Huh." Furthermore, no one seemed to have seen him for a while. For all intents and purposes, Ian had sort of fallen off the face of the earth, leaving behind one last cryptic post. "It's getting too real," the post read. "It's too close." And with that, he'd posted nothing more. I checked the dates, my notes, and made some deductions. That final post of his was written the same day I first started hearing the teeth chattering noise again. That couldn't be a coincidence. It just couldn't. I didn't find out anything else about him, and the sound of teeth chattering with horrible timing was getting worse. Once, I had to pull over in traffic to stop my heart from racing. I could have sworn I saw that hollowed-out face in my rear-view mirror. I was so frustrated that I smacked my hands on my dashboard so hard I got a bruise. By the time I got home, I was nervous and stressed. I threw off my jacket, stormed into the kitchen, and cracked open a Coke. I slammed the door shut so hard, I knocked one of the fridge magnets to the floor. A little blue sunflower. It came with the place. Leaning back against the fridge, my heart skipped a beat. Big Softy was right there, just a few feet away, looking right at me. Clack, clack, clack. I dropped my can of Coke. As it hit the floor, I blinked. In the next moment, I was alone again. Clutching my chest, I picked the can up. I wiped up the spill with a couple of paper towels, trying my best to calm down. This was getting out of hand. I hadn't regained my composure before there was another sound, a knock on the door. It surprised me. I wasn't expecting company. I lumbered over to the door, flustered and shaky. I put my hand on the handle, then stopped. Maybe there was a reason I'd seen that thing. Maybe it wasn't just a psychosis. What if it meant something? Could it have something to do with whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of the door? "I can shoot you through the door," a muffled voice said. "Open." I froze, one hand on the door handle, another hand on my phone. I was stuck. I couldn't make myself move. "I won't ask again. Open." I didn't know what to say. I turned the handle and carefully stepped back. Ian. He looked like he'd gone through hell to get there. Unwashed hair, unkempt beard, and a shiny new handgun pointed at me. His hands were shaking. He wasn't kidding around. His fingers trembled. He was trying to pull the trigger. "Ian?" I said, reflexively. What are you?" "Shut up." He spat. "Just shut up." He raised the handgun, staring me down. The sound of his own name shook him. "It has to end. I can't." His aim faltered. He looked away. A second later, he pushed me back and entered my apartment, closing the door behind him. He led me into the kitchen. There were still wet paper towels on the floor from my spilled drink. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a chair. "Keep your hands on the table." I did as he said. There was a sudden quiet between us, as if he hadn't planned this far. There was a clear uncertainty to his actions, which just made it worse. I couldn't tell what he'd do next. "I need you to make it stop," he said. "It has to stop. It has to. I can't just..." "Don't tell me you can't." He raised his gun, stepping closer. My whole body felt cooler as blood rushed to my arms and legs. "Don't you tell me that," he repeated. "Now make it stop." Before I got a chance to say or do anything, he sat down across from me, gun still pointed in my direction. One wrong move, a twitch, anything, and it'd be over. I almost forgot to breathe. "I know it's yours. It's been yours for always," he continued, scratching his hair, "but it's too much. It's gone too far. So, okay." I tried to collect my thoughts. "You're talking about him, with the teeth." "Don't act like you don't know his fucking name," Ian groaned. "Don't you fucking dare." We looked at one another and said it, in unison. "Big Softy." The moment we said it, I could see him emerging from the shadows in the back of the kitchen. I tried my best not to gasp, or look his way. "He's in my head every night. I hear him, all the time," Ian continued. "That fucking click-clacking, right in my ear. Sometimes in my face, like he wants to take a bite." "I'm not controlling that," I said, carefully picking my words. "I haven't seen him in decades." "You even know how bad you fucked up," he said, squinting with disbelief. "You named it. That's all they need to go off. They need a name. They need to be made real. And you..." He raised his gun, growing more determined by the second. "You made him real." We moved, this time to the bathroom. I didn't have a say in the matter. Having a gun pointed straight at me, somewhere off in the background, I could see the vague shape of Big Softy, moving soundlessly from one room to another. "I can't control it," I said. "I have nothing to..." "I don't care." "But this is pointless. There's nothing." "I don't care. If you go away, his fucking name goes away. You don't know that." I was pushed through the bathroom door and to the back of my shower. I tripped, coming down hard on my tailbone. The ceramic tiles felt icy cold against my sweaty palms. and I could smell a bit of chlorine from the cleaning supplies. He raised his gun. This was it. "Big Softy," I said. That's all I did." I called it a goddamn nickname. I don't deserve to die for that. Ian's resolve faltered. He scratched his head again, groaning, but more so, I could see Big Softy just outside the room. Was he getting closer? "Big Softy," I said again, my eyes darting to the door. I was a scared kid. It just slipped out. "Don't you dare put this on me," he said. "Don't you dare." I observed the creature. It was approaching. Every time I said its name, it got a little closer. Looking Ian dead in the eye, I took a deep breath. This was it. "Big Softy," I said. "Big Softy, Big Softy." What the hell? I kept repeating it, over and over and over. It might do something, it might not. Either way, I had to try. By the 6th time I said it. That enormous, looming creature was inches behind Ian. But more so, it was changing. Not a lot, but enough for me to notice. It was smiling. Ian raised his gun at me and pulled the trigger. At the same time, I said the name for a 7th and final time. The shot went wild as an unhinged jaw came down on Ian's shoulder. There was a scream, a spurt of blood on the bathroom mirror, a flailing arm hitting the light switch, turning a gruesome scene into a shadow theater. Impossibly thin hands wrapping around a throat, twisting his neck like a toothpaste cap, crunching, ripping, chewing, teeth, teeth, teeth. Clack, clack, clack. Laughter, otherworldly, ethereal laughter. I have no idea how long it went on. Ian didn't even have time to beg. The handgun clattered to the ground. It was just me and this thing, alone in a dark bathroom. I couldn't speak. I just curled up into a ball and tried my best to ignore the viscera running into the drain next to me. There was a slight creaking sound as old knees bent, a hot breath on my face. Big Softy could breathe, it seemed. "Nice name," it said. The voice was different, real, tangible. I could hear vibrations in his throat. This was no longer a figment of my imagination. "Going," it continued. "Bye." I could hear something getting dragged out of the apartment. I heard doors open and close, and after God knows how long, I realized I was sitting there, shaking like a dry leaf in the wind. My stomach turned at the idea of turning on the light, but I had to. I got up and reached for the light switch, almost tripping on the handgun, and something slippery clinging to it. Fingers. I flipped the switch, and I broke. I won't go into detail what I saw. Most of the body was gone. Not all of it, but most of it. There was a blood trail leading into the hallway, then disappearing just as it reached the front door. I'd brought that thing into the world. I'd named it, I'd reinforced it, I'd believed it, called out to it, I'd made it real. All it had to do was answer. You can't unlearn something, and even if I could, I think it's too late. I think Big Softy got just enough of what he needed to become something else entirely. He took a life, and now he's got one of his own. Maybe we still have some kind of connection, I don't know. I think we do, or else he might have just killed me too, right then and there. Then again, there's no way to tell. I've obsessed over this for years, looking through articles about mentions of Ian. There were no search parties, no one came looking. Even the people who missed him were reluctant to work with the police, and with his history of schizophrenia, there was a higher likelihood of him just doing something he shouldn't. But I knew better. Ian hadn't been schizophrenic. Big Softy had stuck to him and just tortured him for God knows how long. Decades. Looking back at it, I think that was the plan all along. To drive Ian to a point where he would try to kill me. It is in their final moments that a person gets truly desperate, and that's what I felt on that floor. Desperation. I reached out to whoever would answer, and I couldn't fathom the consequences. He's out there, right now. He probably looks like us, walks like us, and sounds like us, but wherever he is and whatever he does, I don't want a part of it. I don't know what to say. But if you meet a strangely tall man who does that thing with his teeth, just know that there might be more to him, a lot more. He's more than just a big softy. Story 2. I was almost drowned by a film. I was at the HRFY. It's the secret horror movie festival where something genuinely fucked happens every year. And I mean every year. Like, there are some screenings that unleash hordes of bats while the movie is playing. You're free to leave whenever you want, but the movie will still play for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Other screenings hire actors to turn at you and scream at some point in the movie. You have no idea when, or how many times. It's a festival where the word illegal can't even begin to describe what happens. You're forced to sign an NDA if you attend, and you'd only attend if you were a young, stupid edgelord like me who was trying to prove he was hardcore to his friends. Trust me, do not go. You have nothing to prove to anyone. Don't be stupid. If you really want to know what attending HRFY is like, I'll be quick and summarize the one screening I went to. It was the 20th anniversary, and I was lucky enough to get in. I had signed up on the HRRFY dark web forum, where I'm pretty sure my identity may have been stolen. But what can you do? Through a series of cryptic forum DMs, I solved a sequence of riddles and was entered in the lottery for a HRFY entry. Lady Luck took a shine to me, because one day in my mailbox, I received a physical ticket. I had done it. I was going. The actual ticket was a black USB key that announced the location of the festival the night before, which I won't disclose here, otherwise I may be hunted. I was pretty much forced to pay for a very expensive flight in order for me to make it on time. You see, to prevent getting shut down, the location of HRFY changes every year. It's always a small town you've never heard of, where the authorities can't catch on to what's happening until it's well over. Upon arrival, I had to pick between 3 secretly participating theaters. Based on title alone, I decided to go see Many Drownings, directed by Alexander Gowansky, though that might have been a pseudonym. It was in the theater that was furthest away from the downtown core, which meant it was likely the one where the craziest shit was bound to happen. That's what I came here for, right? I lined up a solid 2 hours before the screening like everyone else. The entire line was jittering, just vibrating with excited 20-somethings. Rumors flew left and right. I heard they're going to force everyone to take acid. I heard an actor's gonna run in and shotgun the ceiling. I heard they're going to disappear like 4 more people this year. At this screening, each year people disappeared, and each year the same people were found. And yes, this is the worst part. And why should never, ever go to this event? Again, I will repeat myself. Do not go. No one has ever truly gone missing at HRFY in any legal or physical sense, because every missing person always shows up a day later, convinced that they are fine, refusing to elaborate further. The reason they can't talk is because of the intense NDAs attendees sign. If anything were to leak, they'd be dead. As a result, there are some small support groups for people who have family members who had gone to HRFY and came back irrevocably changed after being found. These few unlucky people lose all semblance of personality. They don't want interviews, or help, or therapy, or contact of any kind, and they never, ever want to talk about what they saw. Some HRRFY fans think that these found people were body snatched, cloned in a lab or replaced by a cyborg, or something stupid like that. But I think there's a far simpler explanation. The found are still the same people. They're just terrified. They got shaken by something that shattered the foundation of their mind, body and soul. They got too scared. They got horrified. I should mention I had a cough the day I went, and I was worried my sickly appearance might give me trouble at the airport. So I invested in an intense double N95 mask, which I wore for the whole flight, and continued to wear even at the screening of Many Drownings. It made my face hot and uncomfortable, but it still didn't stop me from yelling, excuse me," as I ran to snag a seat in the back of the theater. I always preferred sitting in the far back. You get a good view of the whole screen and a good view of the whole audience. Beside me sat a big dude named Sylvester, who apparently flew all the way from Australia to attend HRRFY. Worth the full 17 hours, mate. It's gonna be epic. He dropped a massive camping backpack beside me, which I assumed contained all of his luggage. The lights dimmed, and the production company logos started to play. The whispering, giggling, and suspense all stacked upon each other to create an electric feeling in the air. I was giddy. It's like the entire audience was embarking on a massive roller coaster. The anticipation was the best part for sure. It might have been the only good part. Then the movie started. It was a wide shot of a grey, stormy sea. The waves were massive, and the thunderclouds were looming. There was no land visible in any direction. All we could hear was the sound of waves foaming, swirling, and crashing over and over. Lightning crackled. Rain poured. The camera held perfectly still over this storm, as if it was mounted on a perfectly hovering drone. A drone so resilient that it didn't waver at all. I thought it had to be CGI. The shot held like this for the next few moments. Everyone sat glued to their seats. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What's going to happen? How are they going to scare us? People chuckled. People cheered. People wanted to tease whatever was going to happen already. But nothing did. 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes went by without any change. People started snoring. I looked beside me and saw that Sylvester, the most excited audience member of them all, had fallen totally asleep. The jet lag must have gotten to him. Then I peered beyond the rest of the audience members and saw other people snoozing too. Heads were keeled over. Some people were curled in their seats. Some had even spilled out into the aisle and were dozing on the floor. I looked above the bright screen at the huge vents in the corner of the theater. I saw a faint white gas emerging from the vents. Holy shit, what have we been breathing? I tightened the straps on my N95 mask and made my breathing shallower. The gas must have been pumping since the opening credits, because how else would an audience of 200 people all fall asleep? As I moved my hand through the air in front of me, I could sense the thickness. It was definitely hazier than usual. I took the scarf off my neck and wrapped it around my mouth as well. Then I spotted movement in front of the screen. It was a tall blonde man, wearing a black trench coat and military-grade gas mask. Beside him arrived 6 hazmat suits, who started pointing at various audience members. I slunk in my chair, pretending to sleep like everyone else. 2 hazmats walked over to the front row and picked out a sleeping guy in flannel. They lifted flannel up, under the armpits and by his ankles, carrying him between them both like a hammock. The hazmats walked back up to the stage, where the blonde leader inspected the flannel man and tapped his head. Something was approved. The hazmats began to swing flannel back and forth, as if they were getting ready to toss him, despite their masks. I could hear a very muffled, very distant countdown. 3, 2, 1. The flannel audience member was tossed into the screen. I literally watched him fly into the image of stormy waves and fall into them. The flannel man sank into the grey water like a rock, leaving a few bubbles and foam. A wave came crashing down. All trace of him was gone. What the fuck? All 6 hazmats began grabbing more audience members with much more urgency. It became a minute long process where they would pick the sleeping person up, bring them beside the screen, and then swing toss them into it. How was this possible? I turned slightly to see if there was a projector above me, and realized there was none, which meant maybe there was no screen on stage, which meant maybe it was a portal. I tried to wake Sylvester by shaking him. I pinched his leg and arm a bunch. He was out cold. The hazmat started grabbing audience members from the middle rows now. They were emptying the whole theater. What the hell was I supposed to do? I waited until they grabbed another batch, only a few rows down from me. When all hazmats had their backs turned, I broke into a run. With my left arm, I tightly gripped my mask and scarf against my face, while my right arm vaulted me over seat after seat. I had never breathed so hard, through so much fabric in my life. The hazmats all turned to me. "Hey! Hey!" But their hands were full with their next victims. I ran all the way down the aisle, to the big exit sign on the left. My heartbeat filled my head. My plan was to drop kick through the exit door. I imagined myself breaking through like some flying gazelle. I jumped. I angled my kick. It might as well have been a brick wall. I fell ass first to the ground, followed by my head. Of course the door was locked. Through a muffled mask, I heard a sneering scoff. "Where do you think you're going?" Above me stood the one wearing a trench coat. I could see his piercing grey eyes through his gas mask. I rolled aside and tried to run by him. He lifted a foot and tripped me without effort. My forehead bashed into an empty seat. It dazed me. The blonde leader bent down and grabbed me by the neck, tearing away my scarf and mask. "No! No!" A sweet, ether-like smell filled my nostrils. I did my best to hold my breath, but I could already feel myself getting lightheaded. The other hazmats joined in, grabbing me from all sides. Even if I had the strength to struggle, there was no escape now. Above me, all I could see was the dark theater ceiling and some of the light behind me from the cinema screen. 3, 2, no, please, don't do the splash. I was plunged deep into cold, wet chaos. My head was completely underwater, gagging, bubbles, spinning. I fought for dear life, dog paddling like a maniac, churning, freezing, panic. For a second, my head popped above the water. I inhaled all the air my lungs could muster. I stared across a vast, violent ocean. An enormous 30-foot wave came in my direction. My whole body lifted higher and higher as the wave approached. I did my best to tread water. It seemed to be working. Then a series of smaller waves arrived and smacked my chest. Splash. Spinning, kicking, flipping. My view alternated between the pitch-dark ocean beneath me and the moonlit night sky above. Again I swam to the surface, popped my head out, ravenously sucked in air. There was a small lull in the water. Around me I now registered the other theater-goers. Most of them were lying face down or sinking, but a few were flapping about like me, fighting for their life. And above all of us, a floating white shape. It was painfully bright. I had to lift one hand to look at it. My jaw dropped. It was the movie screen, hanging completely still in the air. It showed a dark, empty theater, the exact same theater we all occupied moments ago. It was tremendously high, above all of our heads. There was no way of reaching it. Then I saw another 30-foot wave come our way. It grazed the bottom of the screen. I knew what had to be done. One of the theater-goers happened to be on a college swim team. She was the first one able to traverse one of the giant waves and climb into the screen. Once she was up there, she found a fire hose in the theater and reeled it out to us like a rope. One by one, we swam as hard as we could, praying to God we could reach the rope. Everyone's energy was sapped. Your body can only sustain itself on adrenaline and fear for so long. By some miracle, 5 of us got out. I was the last. I climbed the rope, coughing and vomiting. I had swallowed so much water that my stomach felt swollen. When I reached the top and they pulled me into the screen, I sobbed. I couldn't stop crying. My life had flashed countless times before my eyes. In bubbling, suffocating visions, I saw both my parents and my brother. I saw my high school graduation. I saw my favorite Christmas from when I was 6 years old. I had almost lost all of that. I had lost almost everything. On the dirty, carpeted theater floor, I lay with my face down, savoring the fact that I now lay on a hard surface. God bless ground. God bless this filthy, popcorn-strewn ground. Beside me I heard bantering, hugging, the wringing of wet clothes. Sylvester was the second last to be saved, and he was particularly vocal. Wah! He came and drummed me on the back, lifted me up, Oh my God, dude. Holy shit! I sat on my knees, wiping the tears and snot off my mouth. Sylvester clapped his hands, held his face and screamed some more. Holy shit, dude. That was so fucking scary. Like literally people were dying beside us. Like I saw people die. I nodded, shivering in my drenched clothes. I know it was... That was crazy! He laughed and stood up, patting everyone on the back. He kept clapping his hands like this was some sports event. That was sick. That was sick! He ruffled someone's hair, then ran up to me with an open palm. High five, dude. We made it! High five! Don't leave me hanging, dude. Story 3. The Little Night. It was early September of 1961, just a few miles out from the east shore of Lake Pontchartrain. We were on a noble quest, a knight's errand, as Bobby put it. He was always the smarter of us, the reader who liked to tell his baby brother scary stories in the dark, where heroes would face great evils. Sometimes they won, and sometimes they didn't. Bobby was my older brother by 5 years. He was all I had. We were forced to live with our uncle after our parents died in a house fire just 2 years before, and our lives had taken a turn. We'd always been poor, but living with our uncle was a new level of poverty and neglect that we had never known. I still got some rough spots on my arse end that built up underneath my uncle's switch. He was the opposite of our old man, and there wasn't even a lesser shadow of our perfect mother to take her place. There was only our uncle and his switch and his drink. As far back as I can remember, there were always stories of a witch who lived far beyond town out in the sticks. Stories of the swamp woman who would grant a wish and give you anything you wanted if you passed her awful test. Of course, no one ever did. Bobby heard them stories too. One late afternoon, we set out upon the swamp after our uncle had fallen deep under the spell of his whiskey. We rode our rusted old bicycles to the end of Louis Road and hoofed it the rest of the way through the cypress trees, up a winding path full of bugs and snakes and mud. It started pouring rain just before the shack came into view through the trees. It was a slapdash affair with mismatched mossy boards and a metal roof. We could hear the rain pounding down on it before it even came into view. It sat at the edge of a fetid bog. There were a couple of windows on the front of it with some of the panes missing. A couple of badly preserved hogsheads were on either side of the front door, just rotting and falling apart in that thick Louisiana air. A single rocking chair was on the porch. It was unlike anything else outside of, or within the shack. It was of a deep red wood, and it was polished to a high shine. It looked like something a queen would have been proud of to sit on. The one thing I remember that stuck out most were the stilts the shack sat on. Girthy timbers that held strong on the ground with several other pieces of wood splayed out on the bottoms. It looked like a bunch of chicken legs was holding it up. The rotten steps up to her porch gave under our muddy sneakers, and they groaned for mercy, crying out for help. Somewhere, out in the thick of that swamp, something answered that cry back. Me and Bobby froze. We had never heard an animal call like that before. We didn't know what it was, but it's still to this day the most awful, terrifying shriek I ever heard. Only the sound of a fire cracking in a pot-bellied stove snapped us back into the moment. And when we turned, she was standing in the doorway staring at us. A gnarled old woman with skin like shoe leather and the whitest teeth I'd ever seen. I took a step behind my big brother. She scared me. It went like this, just like the stories we heard. Bobby offered her his most cherished possession, and in return, she gave him the opportunity to take her test. If he won her game, he got his wish. If he lost, she kept his item, and something terrible would befall Bobby. Although we weren't sure at the time what that meant, all the stories we had heard left that terribleness up to the imagination. Come to find out, it was worse than I could have known. Bobby held out his Mickey Mouse doll he got the Christmas before I was born. My uncle made fun of him for keeping that thing, said he took it as evidence for him being queer, and beat him for it time and again. Bobby swore it still smelled like our old house. He would have taken 1,000 beatings before he gave that thing up. I watched him hand it over into the arthritic claws of that old witch. I watched her close those long nails around Mickey's face and almost cried. "How old are you?" "Boy." Her voice sounded broken, and her every breath was a tired wheeze. I strained to hear her over the driving rain on that metal roof. "I'm 14. Mom." "You know, you face death if you fail, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am." My brother had no idea what those words meant, and neither did I. He was brave because he didn't realize what he was agreeing to. "What is it you want?" "I want my parents back. I can only do one miracle at a time." She smiled wide, and I noticed that one of her bottom teeth was missing, a tiny black hole in that otherwise perfect smile. "Pick one or the other." Bobby looked down at the floor, and then he looked back to me. I could read it in his face that he felt he'd be betraying one or the other. As for me, I would have picked my mama. I told Bobby that our daddy would be just fine in heaven by himself for a little longer, and that he would understand why we would pick mama over him. That seemed to make sense to Bobby, and he nodded at me before he turned back to the witch. "I want my mama back." That witch just smiled at Bobby, and then she ushered us into that nasty old shack. Books and books, moldy old books that reeked. Several cats were inside, and the smell of their piss made it hard to breathe. There were some shelves filled with odd knickknacks alongside one of the walls. A small family picture, a Bible, a baseball card, a fishing reel, all kinds of things. It was on one of these shelves that she placed Bobby's stuffed Mickey. There was a single door in the back of the shack, and she led us through it. Inside was only 3 things: a chair in the middle of the tiny room, and a small table sitting a few feet from it, with a cracked metronome sitting on top of it. There was no roof sitting on the 4 walls of this room. The rain was just pouring down inside. "Sit." I watched the floorboards bow under Bobby as he walked to the chair and sat down. The witch followed him. There were straps on the armrests and legs, just like in those pictures I had seen of electric chairs, and the witch tightened them on my brother after he sat down. "Watch this and only this." That old metronome started clicking under her touch. "What's going to happen?" "That's up to you. If your mind and your courage hold up, you'll get what you want. I suppose either way, you'll be seeing your mama real soon." She let out a terrible laugh as she pushed me out of the room and closed the door on my brother. I told him I loved him, and he said the same back to me. We walked out onto the porch, and she plopped down on that ornate rocking chair, lit up a pipe, and just stared at me while she rocked back and forth. All those cats sat around her. They were staring at me as well. It was almost dark. The rhythm of her rocking matched the clicking of that metronome that I could barely hear behind the closed door inside. The rain let up, and the fireflies were starting to come out. Her and those cats just stared at me. She was enjoying my fear. I started to ask her how long my brother would be in there, but she put her finger to her lips and told me to hush and listen. The sound of that metronome got louder, along with the groaning boards from the porch under the weight of her chair. I heard that awful animal out in the woods again, but this time it was answered by another call of the same, and then another, and another. The woods came alive with sounds that still give me nightmares. The sounds surrounded me in the dying light of that evening. That's when Bobby started to cry out. He was wailing in pain behind that old door, and I rushed inside to try and help him, while the old witch just sat in that chair and rocked. There was no lock on the door, but for some reason it just wouldn't open. I tried, and I begged God to help me and my brother. Bobby was screaming for help, but there was nothing I could do but cry. I ran back out onto the porch and begged the old woman to let my brother out of that room. She just smiled and puffed on that pipe. Then there was nothing but the sound of the metronome. The forest had gone quiet. Bobby had gone quiet. The fireflies were everywhere. The wind picked up, and the moss hanging from the trees started to dance against it. The old woman put down her pipe and took her time standing up. Then she walked back inside, and I followed. She opened the door. Bobby was still sitting in the chair with his eyes wide open, but he wasn't moving. He looked afraid. "He's with your mama now," I ran to Bobby, but she was right. He was gone. His skin was blue and he wasn't breathing. His eyes were full of tears and a thin trail of blood ran from his mouth. She pushed me out of the way and loosened the straps on the chair. I watched her heave my brother's lifeless body over her crooked shoulder. She walked out of the shack and off the porch. All I could do was follow. She walked over to the edge of the bog and heaved my brother into the muddy water. The shrieks from the forest returned, a greedy, hungry sound that I imagine came from hell itself. I watched Bobby slowly sink as she left me there on my knees at the bank. I was alone. After a good long sob, I walked back over to the trail we had walked in on. I looked back over my shoulder and saw the witch just rocking on her porch and smoking her pipe in the darkness. Her cats all perched on the rails of the porch with their glowing eyes fixed on me. I stared back down the trail and I thought about what my brother said. We were on a knight's errand. I slid my hand into my pocket and felt something I always carried with me. A small whistle that my daddy had carved from the cypress next to our old house. The only thing I had left. I knew I'd never see my parents again in this life. I accepted it, but I couldn't leave without my brother. I took out the whistle and put it to my lips, and I blew as hard as I could. The forest fell silent, as if the sound of that whistle scared away all the evil things out in the darkness. I walked back to the shack. The witch wasn't rocking anymore. I walked up the steps and I held my whistle forward. "How old are you?" "Boy." "I'm 9.
Mom.
You know, you face death if you fail, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am." I knew what those words meant. I knew full well what I was agreeing to. "What is it you want?" "I want my brother back." Bobby would tell me later that he saw our parents for just a moment before he came back to me. They were crying and told him that they were fine and they wished he had just moved on and lived a long life. That they were going to see him further down the road anyway. I suppose he's with them again. I lost him to a stroke last year. I rest easy at night, knowing that I'll see them all again someday, along with everyone else I've lost. Life is good and meant to be lived without looking back, because what comes after it will be, no matter what. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.